The World Bank becoming the first financial institution to cut the country's economic growth outlook to below 1% for 2020. Lower growth means weak prospects for job creation and a greater chance of tax hikes. It comes at a time when government is pushing for higher growth and campaigning for investment. So let's take you straight to Washington. World Bank economist Rudy Steinbach joins us. Rudy, it's just after sunrise in Washington. Good morning. Presumably our return to erratic and fragile power supply was one of the big reasons for your downwardly revised growth forecast this year.
Yes, good morning or good afternoon in South Africa. Thank you for having me. Yes, you're right. So as you've said, we've revised down growth quite substantially. Starting with last year, 2019, that was a significant revision down. Growth in 2019 is now estimated at 0.4%, which is half the rate in 2018. And this reflects 2 quarters of contraction out of the 3 that we have available data for. And in those quarters, we saw contracting exports, we saw weak investment. And moving into the 4th quarter, activity indicators are suggesting that growth remained low. And at the start of 2020, we think that this weak momentum will probably persist into this year. And that has been one of the reasons why we've downgraded the growth forecast. Yes, you've mentioned load shedding has played a role. Constraints at Eskom are becoming more apparent and are definitely becoming a binding constraint on faster growth. But it's not just been Eskom. If I can just share with you the global context, the global economy had a very difficult year in 2019. Our global growth has been the lowest it's been since the global financial crisis at 2.4%. And this has reflected weak trade activity, weak investment, and weak industrial activity, as well as heightened policy uncertainty. For Africa as a region, which exports commodities, low commodity prices aggravated this. So it's domestic constraints, but there's also a global story to the weakness that we've seen in South Africa.
You point to policy uncertainty, those concerns that keep investors away from expanding or spending money in the country. What are the most pressing uncertain areas for investors?
Well, there's quite a few. Obviously, investors are concerned about how the Eskom struggles will be resolved. In October last year, government proposed that it plans to split the entity into 3 separate units. That, however, seems to be not going down that well with labor unions, so that could potentially be a dragged-out process to implement this, as the proposal said that this implementation will only happen once agreement has been found with unions. So resolving Eskom is a concern, as it weighs heavily on production and it weighs heavily on the fiscal balance, as we've seen. But there's others as well. Land rights still remain fairly uncertain. There's been some progress, and hopefully in 2020 there'll be more clarity on that. Another example is the economic policy or growth strategy that Treasury released last year in August. These are pragmatic suggestions of how to get the economy from this low growth trap. However, implementation seems to be unclear, as not all factions of government are necessarily on board. So there's a lot of issues at the moment that are unresolved and could potentially weigh on business and investor confidence.
It's interesting you're mentioning the economic strategy released by Treasury. The Finance Minister not too happy about this on Twitter this morning, pushing for a closer look at that. So we have the ANC delivering an important annual statement tomorrow, the January the 8th statement, where it will presumably touch on its economic position. What are the possible favourable points that could help sentiment tomorrow?
Yes, so as I said earlier, I think announcements on first of all on how to address the power situation will do a lot to boost confidence. So that is key. However, in addition to the Eskom problem, South Africa also has a significant fiscal constraint, and I'm not sure whether this will be addressed tomorrow. This will probably only be discussed in the February budget, but obviously there's been a lot of talk of downgrade. The fiscal situation has deteriorated significantly during 2019 as a result of revenue underperformance, as well as the additional fiscal burden that the support for Eskom is placing on spending. So key things for investors to look at is obviously the Eskom situation, what government is going to do about the fiscal situation would be among them.
All right, thanks very much indeed. World Bank economist Rudy Steinbach, they're talking to us from Washington.